back to the P2 podcast. I'm your
Hello.
host. I get to say I'm your host. If you don't know who I am, my name is Paige Thorla. I am head of nutrition at Progressive Performance, which is a made-up title, but I think this shoe fits. And Maggie, this is our second podcast together. I feel we'll do a lot of these. I just had this vibe, this like feeling that I needed to talk to you this week when I texted you like 48 hours ago and was like, let's do a podcast. No, it was like 24 hours ago. So for those of you who don't know, this is Maggie. She is our mindset coach, mental health coach, psychiatry background, social work background, 10 years in the biz, and so glad to have her. If you haven't listened to our first podcast, please go listen to it because it's why we brought her on and it's more about her because that's not what we're going to talk about today.
No, we've got some exciting things to talk about today.
Yeah, I just feel like, I feel like this is a conversation that I just have been wanting to have with you anyway. And now we just get to share it with the world, but unrehearsed. It's going to be good. So, okay. One of the first things I want to talk about, because if you haven't listened to that first episode, mental health is such an ingrained part of food culture, and then more so tracking culture, diet culture, and you really can't have one without the other. And it's meant so much to me to have you on board because there's so much that most online coaches don't know when it comes to the psychology, because obviously that's just education that most of us don't have. So I just so appreciate having you on the team and as a friend because you are just so much knowledge. And so what I want to talk to you today about, because we are trying to figure out how to make this podcast episode a little bit more specific so we're not just talking about literally all the things that we probably could. We are mostly going to focus on this idea called functional freeze. And I am so excited for you to dive into what that means and how we can sort of like bring it home for the people who probably are listening, which are people who train and track. And then we might even touch on alcohol a little bit. Because I just posted in Discord. If you're not in the P2 Discord, everybody, it is free. You do not have to be part of the P2 team to be in our general chat, and it's so fun in there. But I did mention in my client chat that I went out on Friday, and I never do, and paid the price. And it was cool because a lot of people, I feel, are more open to talking about that, especially in comfortable spaces, just their experience with alcohol and how it plays into your mental health. So we'll start with functional freeze. So let me tell you my understanding of it because it's so brief, and then I'll let you go into it. So my therapist, who I love, shout out, her name is Corey Gerster, found her through BetterHelp. She, just in me describing how I am, she described that what I'm experiencing often is functional freeze. And what I understand that to be is it's the second part of that freeze means you're unable to complete possibly a task that's been looming, or maybe the most important task or the most relevant task in your life. So you're unable to do that thing. But the functionality part of it, so the functional part of the functional freeze, is that you almost distract yourself from getting that thing done with all of these other things to like subconsciously justify not doing it. And I think that's so interesting. And maybe that's not even the correct like definition of functional freeze, but that's how it was brought up to me. And I actually really appreciate understanding that that's something I do, because I almost don't even have to demonize it. I can almost just acknowledge it. Like, this is what's happening, because I do think I'm a go-getter, but I also have the procrastination gene in me where it's like, I wonder when I have to get that done by, and then I'll get it done. But it's interesting to think that in my long to-do list of things, the most important thing still isn't getting done, but I could tell you 12 other things I did that day. And like,
Mm.
isn't this good? So what are your takes on my take on it?
So I think everybody is going to function with functional freeze differently, right? That's kind of the interesting and cool thing about mental health is that not all one thing fits into the same box. People end up experiencing their symptoms differently. But at the core of it, and what you were saying is very accurate, and that you're feeling really overwhelmed. The core thing about functional freeze is that essentially you have nervous system dysregulation. So when you're taking a look at anytime that a human, and let me start with this first. The human body is really amazing at protecting you. So when something major comes your way, a stressor, what's going to happen? You either fight, flight, or freeze, right? So the freeze portion is something that I'm going to concentrate on here. When you freeze, you're shutting down an attack, right? Something that in your brain, in your body feels to be really unsafe. So typically, when a stressor comes at you, eventually your body feels safe enough to move away from that, right? And then your nervous system resets back into a relaxed state of being. However, if that stressor does not go away, or if we continue to remain in a state of stress, overwhelm for too long, that's when we move into functional freeze. So, what functional freeze looks like, it could be exactly like how you mentioned. For me, I'm here like scrolling on my phone through TikTok. I feel exhausted. I'm isolating. But what I am able to do is I'm able to function outwardly and get
Mm-hmm.
all of my priorities completed during the day. I'm hitting the gym. I'm
Mm-hmm.
still going to work. I'm
Mm-hmm.
showing up for my social activities. And on the outside, I look very normal. But what it is on the inside, I'm very, very tired. And I have overwhelmed my system to the point to where I cannot complete the tasks outside of my priorities. I made a TikTok the other day, and it's on my personal
Mm-hmm.
Instagram with basically just two
A
sponges. Yeah, the
sponge.
sponge view.
Yes. So
So what I
good.
did was I wet a sponge and I left one sponge normal as is, completely dry, just to kind of showcase what it looks like when you are at a functional freeze. At the end of a day, when you have stayed in that state of overwhelm, your sponge is like sopping wet, right? And I let that air out for a good 8, 9, 10 hours. But at the end of that 10-hour frame, my sponge was still pretty wet.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talk about baselines. When you're at a functional freeze, your baseline is not at a 0. Your baseline is already slightly triggered.
Mm-hmm.
You may be at a 4, 5, 6. Well, think about when you're already at that 6 level, how little it takes for you to get to a 7 or an 8 when you feel like, holy shit, I'm so overwhelmed that I can't function at all.
Mm-hmm.
So you really set yourself up because you turned your system on for so long that your homeostasis is not where it needs to be. And so
Mm-hmm.
what we have to do then is we have to come back down and do some nervous system work. And I think also what people don't understand is that it's not a simple fix. Nervous system work is not a simple fix because knowing your personality page and knowing how much you've worked in the past 10 years, you've done
Mm-hmm.
so much work for yourself to get to where you're at today that you cannot detox in one night. You can't detox because you're putting on a face mask or you're going to get one
Right.
or massage. It takes
Mm-hmm.
it takes some work to get
Mm-hmm.
your baseline down from a 6 down to like even a 3.
So what's so interesting is I'm curious. So when you mentioned um, something that isn't going away, which causes the functional part of the freeze, so it's like a protecting, your body's protecting you. It's so funny because we're talking about like survival, but it can happen from like a stupid work deadline or like something that I have on my to-do list that isn't life or death, but it's so overwhelming. And so when you were talking, my brain went to, from what I've learned is it sounds like, because I'm using like a personal example, I need to figure out why I'm being so triggered by that task because, and that's kind of the like nervous system work that you're talking about. But I wonder how specific does it need to be to that actual task that's causing you so much dread? Even if it doesn't, like, I wouldn't say this one thing on my to-do list that I haven't finished yet for months isn't causing me dread, but it is the thing that causes my functional freeze in that I still don't have it done yet have done all these other things that don't need to be done. And so it's just interesting to me, like, I feel like I need to figure out what it is about that task, whether it's, is there like an imposter syndrome situation in like this particular thing that I'm trying to create? Is it like I don't have a direction with it? Because that's something my therapist works with me on is that overwhelming because you think that when you start something, you have to finish it in that moment? Because that's my thing is even if I know logically I don't have to, I think my brain is like, well, this has to be perfect when you're done, like today, with when you start it. And so I'm working on today's the outline. Tomorrow is so I'm working on that. But it is interesting, like how much do you think the work needs to be directed towards the specific thing that you're freezing with?
I don't think it's important at all. Oddly enough.
Yeah.
I actually think you're thinking too hard. You're doing too much work when it comes to the functional freeze. You said something
Interesting.
at the very beginning of like, it's been really overwhelming. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Life will put you at a functional freeze. When you push yourself to do things on a deadline, like you mentioned, I mean, a functional freeze can be a nervous system dysregulation can be so easy to get into because it can be as simple as going to school and trying to graduate in 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
It can be as simple as you've decided to be a mom. And now for the
Mm-hmm.
next little bit of time as your children are,
Mm-hmm.
growing and developing and waiting until school age, you are pushing yourself every day to get things done. And so
Mm-hmm.
then at that point, when you become so overwhelmed, those other priorities that you have, like those tasks that you're talking about, they're not as important. The other things, however, you need to do in order to survive, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense.
Yeah, I love that. And what makes me then think how we can tie it back to listeners is how often do you think people, even with just a small weight loss goal, have functional freeze simply because they put themselves in this deadline space
Hmm.
while they're overwhelmed with life, but not acknowledging, or even just does the deadline they give themselves for a fitness goal, health goal, cause that?
Yeah, I think that could be a definite play in things too, because if you're thinking about deadlines for whether your lifestyle or prep, right? There's a lot of responsibilities and tasks that you have to get done. And when you put yourself into that mind frame of it has to be done by a certain time and you're very type A with the deadlines of things, you kind of set yourself up in a way to where failure is not an option. And that's a lot. That's like I'm over
Mm-hmm.
here feeling overwhelmed. If I
Yeah,
put
just
that,
talking about it. Yeah.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that is a lot to say. I have to get it done by X, Y, and Z because why can't it be done after? Right?
Yeah.
Who says you have to
Yes.
do it this way? Who says it
Mm-hmm.
needs to be in a perfected state like this? To be honest,
Yeah.
that's you. You're the only person that is putting up that
Mm-hmm.
restriction, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
then you end up that is a form of self-sabotage is what
Mm-hmm.
happens. And you don't even realize it.
Mm-hmm. I think people don't realize it. That's, I think, what I'd like to get into, because how do you recognize it? And one thing I thought of is I think, I mean, most of my clients right now are lifestyle, but what came to mind is when I have a prep client that does take the deadline off of it. I mean, especially a new competitor, they're like, I really want to do this show. And I get where that comes from because one, they probably don't know any better, but also like maybe the show itself is like what got them into doing it, or a friend is doing a particular show. So I understand it, but you even know the second that you are just like, coach, put me on stage whenever you're ready and I'll do the show you say, those competitors are very successful. They not only then compete when they're actually ready rather than having this looming deadline. But also their stress about when they're going to be ready is like null at that point, which is really cool. And I think that doesn't happen as often in like a general population situation where someone's like, and it's so interesting because when someone comes to me who wants fat loss in particular, typically for health reasons, like I know I'll feel better, I'll move better, I'll have better health markers, and yes, I'll be more comfortable in general. You would think that because there is no deadline, like you said, other than the one they're giving themselves, like where does that come from? And so you would think that it would be more prevalent in my clients, especially who are not competitors, which again is most of them, to just be like, I'll get there when I get there. So what I'm like, now I kind of changed the question, but like, where does that come from? I wonder, because that will not only help coaches listening, I think, working with clients who can never meet their goal because they're constantly stressed about meeting their goal, but then also people who are trying to get fat loss to happen.
Yeah.
Who
I
can't.
think I know what it is. I think I do,
Okay.
because, and I'm taking this with my own
Yeah.
experiences, right? Do you remember when I first worked with you? Because it took us a long time before we even started cutting, right?
Yes.
But at the same time, I was like, whatever you say, I'm going to do, because
You
I'm trying to do
did.
it the way. There was a lot of radical acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
We can talk about radical acceptance here in a
Yeah,
second.
yeah.
Do you recall the first few months? I was like, when are you going to cut me? Hello, when's the next step?
Interesting.
When are we doing this? When are we doing that? And you wouldn't give me an answer, because I think you knew that you didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was dependent on how my body was going to react. It was dependent on whether or not I could follow protocol. It was dependent on whether or not I was getting in the micronutrients and the macronutrients. But what I was doing was I was looking at big picture end goal.
Mm-hmm.
What I was not doing, which at this point, as the mental health coach with P2, it's something that we talk about with our clients, is we're talking about mini goals and setting yourself up to where your first concentration is not the peak.
Mm-hmm.
We're slowly getting up to that peak. And that way you've got something to look forward to.
Yes.
You're accomplishing things and you're able to celebrate them. You're not just waiting around for a year or two before you can hit that final.
I love that. That's so true. And that is like such a simple answer to like my question of what do like coaches do and what do people do for themselves? Like mini goals, it seems so obvious, but I don't think that it is. And I think even for myself, I don't really know what my health goals other than survival are at this point in time. But I do know that if I were to compete again, my end goal, and you've heard me say this, I have so much muscle to put on. That's what I always keep saying. And that is an overwhelming thing because it is a reality. But the mini goals, if I were to set myself up with mini goals on the way, it would feel way less overwhelmed. Like it would be way more attainable. You're right. Yeah. And I think so many people don't give mini goals enough credit. I think that's actually something that happens.
I think too, when you're not working at the time frame that you think you need to work at, when you start to compare yourself to other people that you're seeing on social media, your friends, your peers, whatever, those negative thoughts can come and they can really hinder motivation.
Yeah.
It can really hinder next steps. It can hinder stress, right? And so you see people give up within 3-4 months of starting with a coach, because I think what this is, they're hyper fixated on an outcome that may not be achievable just yet.
Yeah, that's so true. I love that. I feel like that's the podcast. No, what were you going to talk about? The other thing that I wanted to go back to it.
The radical acceptance piece.
Yeah. We should talk about that. Oh, really quickly, because I think before we do talk about that, I just had forgotten what it was. Speaking of comparing yourself to people online, I get the reason people do, because again, even if people understand that Instagram's a highlight reel, heavy air quotes there, it's hard to still, take yourself out of that, because all you're seeing are, well, they did it in X amount of time. And what I want to say to that, to anyone listening, being like, yep, like, why is that? Why is that not me? You can't look at anyone, even if a testimonial you see online gives a little bit of information about that person, where they started, what they've done. You still don't know I mean, first of all, we've talked about a lot, and the P2 podcast, Chris and Bryce did a lot with genetics. So first of all, hello, you're a different human. But second of all, you don't know their dieting history beyond what the caption said. You know, you don't know what it was like. You don't know where they started.
Mm-hmm.
And obvious things, the testimonial may not disclaim everything. You don't know everything. You just don't know everything. So I even think it's posting any testimonial is risky, even as a coach. Like I want people to celebrate themselves and their progress. And I do want people to know like, this could be you, but it's almost like there should always be a disclaimer of like, but not exactly, you know? And it's hard. I do think it's hard for people to take themselves out of like, but why isn't that me? But you just have to remember that you don't know everything about what you see online. So
No, you don't. And there's so much when it comes to social media, when it comes to like instant gratification. We live in a world of instants.
mhm,
So it's easier to just grab onto something that looks like it was done so quickly, easily, and
100%.
then to shame yourself because
Mhm.
you couldn't do it. But that's not
Yeah.
really like what you said. The full picture was not listed here, so
Mhm. Yeah. Okay, so radical acceptance. That's huge.
yeah, radical acceptance. I feel like radical acceptance can be used in so many different arenas when it comes to fitness, when it comes to mental health. In fact, I pretty much touch on some sort of radical acceptance with every client that I see for onboarding
Mhm. Yeah.
or for any individual session that we do, because somebody will come to me and they're putting so much pain and emotion and attaching those feelings towards an issue where if we were utilizing radical acceptance, we understand that basically that suffering actually comes from your attachment of how you perceive the
Mhm.
situation.
Mhm.
So what radical acceptance is, it's you being able to accept situations that are outside of your control and you're not judging them, which then reduces your suffering. So, for example, I've had several clients come to me talking to me about how they're really upset because they've gained weight. But their goal was to gain weight because their goal was to increase muscle mass and they're in an off season. And so they ask me, how are you doing it? Because they know that I'm in the same
Mhm.
situation as well, right?
Mhm.
Where I'm also seeing the scale go up, or I'm
Mhm.
noticing that I'm large instead of an extra small.
Mhm.
Uh, so what it is now instead is that I have radically accepted my situation. I'm using facts. I am using not my emotional side of things, but more of my reasoning side of things, to come up with the factual statements for me to feel understanding of where I'm at. Right. So it is,
Yeah.
I'm gaining weight because I need to put on muscle.
Mhm.
I am eating more and that ensures that I have the strength to train. It is, I'm feeding my body with the nutrients that it needs so that next season I'm going to come out with a
Mhm.
whole different physique.
Mhm.
Right. Instead, what I'm not doing is I've gained weight and things don't fit me and I feel so ashamed. Right. So I'm taking out the emotional piece of things. And that can really be
Yeah.
used for a lot of things. It can be used for somebody who may be kind of stuck in a state of overwhelm constantly because they're in a situation that they can't change.
Mhm.
Right.
Yep. Like I think we should talk about moms, but continue.
Okay. No, you
Yeah.
go on. Tell me about it.
No, so this is like there are a lot of moms that I have now, obviously, and I like love that. And I've said this on Instagram a lot. When you hire me, we just get into it. You don't have to preface with, look, I love being a mom. I know. I know. We're wasting our breath. So let's get into it. But I think what's so interesting about what you're saying and actually makes me feel like I know what I'm doing as a coach because I remember I had a therapy session and then finished work. And so I was feeling real philosophical in my Loom videos to these clients. And in the first Loom video, it was like 15 minutes. And I even was like, disclaimer, I just had therapy, but are you like, sit back, make sure you're sitting for this. But I told her she's a mom of 3 and actually one of my best friends and um, has a history prior to kids of tons of success with a complete different physique, lots more muscle, probably the ability to lose fat faster. And I do think that if you've ever had that, you hold on to well, I've done it before, or that's what I definitely have, or because I have a second question in how it relates to radical acceptance and how people perceive that. And well, I guess I'll say it. I always wonder if people think that radical acceptance equals I'm accepting failure, because they're not doing what you are saying. They're not giving their situation context and seeing things as fact. So for this mom, I said, it's not that physique is unattainable. It's that it's unattainable doing the things you did at that time to get it, because your life is different now, right? So you don't get to be at the gym for 2 hours. You were younger, you were eating completely differently, your interests were different, you didn't, everything was different. So it's not that you have to radically accept that you'll never be that again. It's that you have to radically accept that your process of getting there may take longer, but more importantly is just going to look different. Like you just have to,
Yes.
there's no way it's going to be the same. And I'm in a
Yes.
similar place. And I think that's why I'm actually okay with, I don't have this like dread of feeling somewhat behind in a goal, or just far away from my goal. I won't even say behind, because I am radically accepting that. I've had 3 babies. Like I'm good. Like we're good. Like right now I'm good with, with where life is. Yeah. But it is an acceptance of like, I'm doing what I can now, and it won't always be this way. And I think that's also something that's part of radical acceptance, is it probably won't always be this way. Yeah.
I agree. And I want to take those 2 statements that you just said and put them side by side for a second, because this is the core component of radical acceptance. And I want you to, after each statement, feel the statement.
Okay.
I'm accepting the situation and that I have failed. 1. 2, I have accepted the situation because this is where my life is currently. 2.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When I said that first statement, like I felt like I punched myself in the gut.
Totally.
And
Mm-hmm.
like, how self-deprecating,
Mm-hmm.
how negative. 1, you've not failed. Hello, you've not failed because you're continuously trying,
Yeah,
and
because you're doing it. Mm-hmm.
2, like I was mentioning before, your situation has shifted because your priorities have shifted.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to define what your priorities are and what they mean to you.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody else gets to define that.
Mm-hmm. I think, you know what, and I'm going to get personal here because this is what I talk to my therapist about, but I think so many people relate to, especially who are like me, maybe with a history of they got into health and fitness before they were a mom, is I actually have a hard time with priorities and parsing that out, because it's obvious that my kids and my family are a higher priority, but it is difficult to accept that the other things can't be the same priority. And I'll say it first, for all of us, that doesn't mean that we care less, right, about our kids, and that we care about our bodies and our fitness level more than being a mom and taking care of our families. But I do think it's very common with me as well it seems so simple. Well, your priorities are different, so it's obvious. It's like, okay, but I don't want them to be. It's almost like that's fine. But the work that I've had to do personally is actually on priority work and where my values fit into my priorities. And it's like flipped me on my head. You would think that at 34, just I'm just, you would think at 34, 3 kids later, I would very much so be able to list my values in my sleep. And in a way I can, but when it comes to how I use my values to prioritize my day to day, my week to week, my accomplishments, how I see myself, it's very difficult. And I have a feeling lots of people are like that. So for that to just be the answer of like, well, radical acceptance that it's, you're not a failure, your priorities have changed. Okay, well, what does that mean? What's the next step then? Because because still, I guess what I'm trying to say is that still somewhat sounds like, unless you dive a little deeper, it still feels like, well, what you're telling me is I'm not going to get there because right, because my children are more important now,
Yeah.
because it's okay. So it's automatic that your family and your kids are the highest priority. So if you're saying, well, your priorities are different, okay, so you're saying that I'll never, which is not at all what you're saying and what my therapist has said to me, but it does take a little bit of deeper work. So I can maybe talk about that, but I feel like, can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I think also too when it almost like gives an excuse, right? Of and I have unfortunately seen people who use that as an excuse.
Mm-hmm.
My priorities have changed, and so I'm not working out at all. I'm just
Mm-hmm.
gonna eat what my kids eat.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very extreme side of things.
Mm-hmm.
I think the questions that you have to ask yourself then are: what are my boundaries? What serves me? What does not serve me?
Mm-hmm.
How much am I pushing something that I don't need to push? There's so many questions that you could ask yourself. Do I need to continue in this manner to prove something? Am I proving something? What am I proving? Right. So a lot of inner digging, I think, has to
Mm-hmm.
happen. But we can start off at least with some of those questions and have somebody think about that and build self-awareness through some of those open-ended
Mm-hmm.
questions.
I love that. That was the perfect answer, because I completely agree, because especially for this like friend that I was talking to, I said, other than how your pants fit, are you happy? Like, actually think about it. Like, how will that serve you? How will fitting into a smaller size serve you in life right now? And I'm not saying you can't do it, but if that's the only reason you can give me for what you're trying to do right now, like,
Then you have your answer.
you got your answer. No, you're right.
Yeah.
And I think that is what radical acceptance is versus accepting defeat. It's like, actually, when we're talking about priorities and values, there is a level of like, are you making yourself unhappy for no reason? I mean, is there a level of like, where is that coming from? And I think that's why I think everyone needs therapy, because it's not to discount like those feelings, but they're coming from something. Either you felt the most valued at a particular weight, or, and so was that overgiven at that time by something toxic, or is there something missing in life now? And usually once you get to the bottom of it, you realize you're not going to be happier in a smaller size. Like, you've got the life that you want. So I love that. Asking those questions suck, actually. They suck. And I do think it's interesting. And part of why I love having you is because I almost feel like I, as a dietitian, have no business digging that deep with you. However, if you don't dig that deep, how can I help you?
Yeah.
Like, I love asking those questions, but people don't usually think that when they're going to hire me for 3 months, because that's usually what people think, that's all it takes, dietitian for 3 months, that they're not going to get that deep. And then all of a sudden, almost everybody has to come to that like moment of, okay, but why are these goals even my goals? And so for
Right.
people who don't know, Maggie's talking about with P2, now that we have Maggie, it is a requirement for everybody to get on a call with Maggie within the first week that they sign on with P2 for a little 15-minute goal setting call. And that feels almost so like woo woo, like cool goal setting. Okay, I'm in my 30s, or like I'm in my 40s, like I don't need to do a goal setting call. It's like, have you listened to this podcast? Because maybe you do. and that's what I am so glad we're doing this podcast for, because goals are so underestimated in nervous system regulation and making sure that you're doing this for the right reasons. And also, what's nice is, sure, I'm good at what I do, but also you've got the knowledge. And so you tell me how to coach people. You're like, okay, here's what to look for. They gave me permission to share this. Here's what I want you guys to touch on in a month, in 3 months. And I mean, invaluable as a coach. And so, yeah, I do appreciate so much that right away you're like part of that for them.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's been a very fun journey because, like you said, we actually do get deep. They're 15-minute phone calls, and sometimes they last 30 minutes, and we talk about shit. We really
Dang.
do.
Yeah.
And they're important, like you said, because
Mhm.
the questions that you pose to your clients are necessary for post graduation too,
Mhm.
right? Because you get to choose what type of work you're doing with your clients. You could very quickly just be like, yeah, I'm going to put you on the superficial route and get you to lose 10 pounds in a month. But
Mhm.
guess what? If you're not doing the deep work and figuring out what is going on with your eating habits, what's going on with your motivations, what's going on with your self esteem, guaranteed that weight's going to pop right back
Mhm.
because you're not sure how to maintain.
Mhm.
And maintaining is not just about a maintenance of calories. It's not just
Mhm.
that. It's
Mhm.
also maintenance of mental health. It's maintenance of overall well-being, which is
Mhm.
why you guys asked me to come on because
Mhm.
that was such an important value for P2 was overall well-being.
For sure. Yes. So I do want to touch on alcohol a little bit, and if we can tie it in and not make it so random, that would be good. But also, do you quickly have any takeaways or like tips for nervous system regulation? Although obviously that could be its own episode. Like, any like high level takeaways beyond just asking yourself the hard questions?
Yeah.
Anything people
Oh my
could do,
goodness.
or
So you're right because I feel like I could go on for hours
I
talking about
know.
nervous system work. It's my favorite thing to do because it gives you the growth that I see from clients that are able to do this.
Mm.
It's amazing and it's mesmerizing to watch because they glow differently.
Mm-hmm.
Changes for them. So, like I had mentioned before, nervous system reset work is not just a one time a week, one time a month sort of
Mm-hmm.
deal.
Mm-hmm.
You really have to relearn how to get your baseline back down, which means you have to challenge yourself every day. Yeah, you could ask those questions to yourself every day. You could journal every day. That works. But you need to actually commit to doing the work on a daily basis, right? And having self awareness where if you're noticing that you're revving up and you're getting anxious, because that's one of the things that happens when you have functional freeze is that anxiety ramps up for no reason.
Mm-hmm.
There's no trigger. Instead of allowing yourself to fester in that anxiety, or instead of allowing yourself to avoid and disassociate from that anxiety because you're scrolling, ask
Right.
yourself what's going on for a second
Mm-hmm.
and do a body check. Continue to do that. Like I said, on a daily basis, it takes months, sometimes years for that nervous system reset
Mm-hmm.
to really get back down to a place where you feel that you are good.
So just to really quick piggyback off of that. So if someone is giving themselves that the reflection to sit in their feelings, do you have like even just a general next step? Like, what if they're acknowledging and letting themselves not run away from the feeling? Like, what's next?
What's next? Okay, so if you are sitting with your feelings, one thing I want you to focus on is your five senses. What are you feeling? Right? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you touching? Things like that. And really do a mindfulness exercise, incorporate mindfulness into that exercise. If you can figure out what your stressor is, because a lot of the times, like I said, your body is really smart. It tells you what's going on if you just listen to it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the times your thoughts happen first. But it can be really difficult to track and think about what it is that your mind is saying to you. What's going on up here? Is it something that you can fix right now? Sometimes it's not, because sometimes it's a self-deprecating thought,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or sometimes it's a flashback. Remind yourself that you're still safe, right? If you can fix it, fix it. If you can't, use that radical acceptance and
Mm-hmm.
do the mind shift, perspective shift work.
And I think the purpose of that people need to realize is that you're just coming out of that fight, flight, or freeze state, because it's hard to even acknowledge sometimes that you're in it, especially when freeze is one of them, right? Fight or flight almost, that feels like anxiety, whereas freeze, it's less obvious, but probably the most prominent maybe. So I think the purpose of sitting with your feelings and then doing a touching base with all of your senses is to get yourself what more relaxed, more productive,
Mm-hmm.
like more able to accomplish your goals long term, right?
Mm-hmm. And I'll give you a hint too, because I had said, if you can fix it, fix it. But what I don't mean by that is I don't mean be reactionary.
Mhm.
If you're getting triggered because somebody cussed you out in a text message, wait,
Mhm.
give yourself 20 to 30 minutes. It takes about 20 minutes for your cortisol to drop. Wait until you're calm and then compose something and then fix it.
Or like rage note write. It's one of my favorite things to do. You pop open a note, you rage text, and sometimes you even voice to text. You rage it out, and then you read it 20 minutes later and you're like, I feel better.
Yeah.
Delete or like don't need to send it. Yeah, that's so interesting because I think that again, in the context of what I do and how you help is people don't understand why they're not getting progress. And it's because they're constantly in this state of stress and it's difficult to do the work because the markers of is this working or not is not as they're not as obvious, right?
Mhm.
Whereas it's like
It's
you're
biased.
dehydrated, you drink some water, you feel better. It's like it's not. I think that's important when we say it takes day after day work. It's because what you're trying to do is acknowledge triggers, and nervous system work is resetting baseline. What you said in the beginning, it's getting your body back to a place that you're able to respond to stimuli, which is protocol that I give you. And
Correct.
that's hard for people to understand because they think, well, I do, I do deep breathing or like, I'm sleeping better. It's like, no, you're not lowering your baseline. You're going from a 5 to a 7 to a 5 to a 7 to an 8 to a 5. You're not going from a 5 to a 3 to a 2 to a 1 with that daily work. And that's the point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And speaking of which, too, it's like I was saying, your body's really smart, right? Your body also, when it protects you, doesn't give you the full truth of things because you're the one that's living in your body. And so um, you really have to humble yourself a little bit. And what I mean by that is your body adapts and it does a very good job of hiding adaptation. So when you're adapting from stress, that means your body is tolerating more stress and you don't
Mm-hmm.
even realize that you're tolerating it.
Mm-hmm.
And before you even realize it, you've gone from pretty good baseline to all of a sudden you're constantly in crisis and what's going on, you don't know. Things are so overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. And I think it manifests like the way if that's you is all of a sudden you're tired all the time, or all of a sudden you can't lose weight like you could, or all this, right? Like, like I'm sure you can figure out that you're there in
Yeah.
some capacity.
We're internally feeling chaotic all the time, like
Mm-hmm.
that
Yeah.
something's
Right.
going on.
Tap in. Me. No. So alcohol, I feel like this in itself could be an episode, especially like on personal level maybe, but in general, I think a lot of my clients, I would say a big majority of them, alcohol gets in the way of their health goals. And the way I feel it ties in here is not digging deep into the whys behind the alcohol use. Do
Or even
you?
using alcohol as like a coping skill because so
Mm-hmm,
many people use it as coping. Speaking of nervous system work,
mm-hmm,
guaranteed if you have 2 glasses of wine, you're going to feel calm.
mm-hmm. Until you don't.
Until you don't.
No, until you don't. No, and that's what's so interesting. I don't know the exact science, but it's so interesting that you like a hangover increases anxiety and depression. Like, what is that?
Mhm.
That's so
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. So let me backtrack a little bit and kind of add on to what I was saying. The reason why when you are stressed and you drink, you feel calmer, it's because alcohol is a depressant.
Mm-hmm,
But what people oftentimes don't understand is that cool alcohol is a depressant that makes you feel good in the moment, right? Talking about instant gratification. In the long run, it works on your GABA receptors, it works on your dopamine receptors. It is a substance that requires more for you to feel the same high or drunk.
mm-hmm,
Uh, and you can become dependent on it if you're not careful. And with alcohol, it's technically, like scientifically, alcohol is a toxin. It's a poison. When you drink it, you need to understand that you are putting poison into your body. And so that
Mhm.
directly affects your entire body. It's also a level 1 carcinogen, so it's known to cause cancers.
Mhm.
But the weird thing is alcohol is so celebrated.
Mhm.
And you see it,
Normalized.
it's
Yeah.
so much so. If take a look the next time that you're watching an adult TV show or an adult movie, just be aware of how often alcohol is portrayed. It's the only drug that causes generational destruction, increases generational traumas, but it's marketed as a celebration, which
Absolutely.
is wild to me. Because you don't see people out here celebrating heroin
Wild.
or meth,
Mhm.
but it how it works in your brain is very similar if
Yeah.
you're using that one.
That's so crazy. I have a client who like loves me and is a repeat client. So she knows I just knew I could dig a little deeper. And when she talked about how alcohol plays a role specifically with her family, I wrote her like 20 questions. I said, "Girl, you don't have to answer this for me, but you got to answer these questions." And it was deep. It was like, who makes you feel this way? Pick a person, right? Are you using your family as an excuse because you want to? I was diving in, and I think it's good to do, because at the very least you need to be in touch with your reasons, just like with everything, but for your reasons for doing it. And it's probably never going to add up in the end, right? Like, I do it to relax. Okay. I mean, even that simple answer, like, it's not doing exactly what you think it's doing. And
Mhm.
just so people know, from a nutritional standpoint, metabolically, because it is literally a toxin, a poison, like you said, your body registers that and will immediately switch to metabolizing alcohol first and foremost, as if it's like, I will die if I don't do this. Meaning that everything else your body's trying to do at that time is put on hold. That's wild. So if
That's so
you're drinking and trying to do anything, if you're drinking and trying to think, your thinking's second. If you're drinking
yeah.
and trying to do anything physical, that's for sure second. But even if
Mhm.
you're drinking and eating, metabolizing your food is second.
Mhm. Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, and
Wild.
it is wild, and it takes away from so much that you could be consuming from whole foods, right?
I
I
mean, that's a whole other topic. Yeah.
That's a whole nother,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. I have friends who have been trying to lose weight for a number of years, and I told them, I want you to track your alcohol for one day,
Hmm.
on the day that you are out drinking.
Hmm.
Because what they found out, and some of my friends can be heavy drinkers, they're out day drinking and then
Hmm.
drinking several cocktails at night, and it leads to like, I'm not kidding when I say it leads to like 10 cocktails. Did
Yeah.
you know when you drink 10 cocktails, that's like 2,000 calories, my friends? This is
Wild.
why you cannot lose weight.
Hmm. No, wild. And that's just the calorie part of it. I mean, that's not
Yes.
even the fact that you're probably storing more fat, your testosterone's dropping, you're getting zero micronutrients. I mean, that's even just calories. That's not
Mhm.
even half of it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it is crazy, the mental side of things, and how, I mean, I just think it fits into this discussion briefly, in that if you have any type of health goal, fat loss goal for sure, and alcohol is part of it, I always say you're throwing a wrench in the machine. It
Yeah.
will never help you. Will never help you. Even if you're like, this is how I relax, but I'm also getting micros and sleeping. It's like, it's a wrench.
Mm.
We can bypass, we can still make the machine run. But I do think that first and foremost, alcohol anywhere isn't ever going to do what you think it's not really helping. But then
Yeah.
obviously that mental side of things, like, is it preventing you from doing the hard work, which is the whole point of this episode? Is, do you actually need to ask yourself the hard questions? Do you need to look at your priorities? Do you need to look at your reasons why? When's the last time you set some goals up for yourself? And how is alcohol getting in the way of that?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And I think the more that you're just educated on alcohol when it comes to, like you were saying, how your body
Hmm.
absorbs it
Hmm.
or how many calories that you're getting in, that is the best thing that we can ask our clients to
Hmm.
do, is just to set yourself up for awareness. Because I'm not one to say you should be sober.
Right.
I'm not going to push my
Mm-mm.
opinions or like my own lifestyle on
Mm-mm.
somebody else.
No.
Um, but at least be educated on what you're putting into your body, and also
Mhm.
have an understanding of why you act the way that you act when you're drunk,
Mhm.
why you have a hangover, what's going on in your brain when you have that anxiety, right? And
Mhm.
how alcohol really, really affects the brain.
Mhm.
So, what alcohol does, like I said, it works on your GABA receptors, and your GABA receptors, uh, basically what it does is it regulates your body's nervous system. So, on top of that, alcohol activates dopamine and serotonin. So, it leads to pleasure like very momentarily when you're consuming it, right?
Mhm.
And because it's working off of those reward systems, it's
Mhm.
very, very addictive. And so the come down can be very, very rough,
Mhm.
especially if you already have a history of anxiety or depression, or if you're maybe even an alcoholic and you don't know you have alcohol abuse or alcohol dependency and you're not aware of it,
Mhm.
right? So when you're messing up those neurotransmitters in the brain, it goes into overdrive when you're withdrawing from
Mhm.
alcohol. And when I say withdrawal, what we have to understand is that withdrawal is not just after you've consumed a shit ton.
Mhm.
It can be just after one or two drinks because you've
Mhm.
introduced a substance into your body and it's got to detox
Yeah,
something.
sure.
That's what I mean
Yeah.
why it's withdrawing.
Yeah.
And so then your nervous system is working up a storm as you're coming off of it. And at least for me, this is the reason why I gave up alcohol, is because the come down for me was so debilitating.
Mm.
And I
Mhm.
hated living like
Yeah.
that, feeling
Yeah.
as if I was only negative and speaking negatively to myself. And it really impacted my day. Actually, it impacted days
Mhm.
after I had a handful of drinks.
Yeah.
It just wasn't worth it.
And I come from a place where I love your point that it's more about awareness. This is not an anti-alcohol episode necessarily. It's just an awareness episode because I do think a lot of people are not even willing to be aware. And because I do drink on occasion, I'm probably like the once a monthers, and I get a ton of those because we ask in the intake form. I'm like, what's your vibe? And it's usually a couple once a month, couple drinks a month. And so I think it's interesting just to be aware of how prevalent it is, and also that even the once a month will still affect you the same. It may not affect your overall month as much as someone who maybe does it every week, multiple
Hmm.
times a week, but
Hmm.
the isolated instance will still affect that moment, right? So like when people, even if it's just a once a month thing, okay, well, overall your progress is probably going to be fine. But if you and I, me as your coach, come to a week where you're really struggling and mentally you're already not doing great, something happens at home, your progress is slow, and then you add a drink to that just because you were out at a party and that was your once a month, and your mental gets worse, it's an awareness thing. We just need to acknowledge, well, you introduced alcohol into that situation. So let's get past that. Let's go back to basics, and realize, just literally realize that alcohol plays a role in the negative that you're feeling.
Yes, and in the larger picture of things too. And when
Mm-hmm.
you're out drinking socially, like you forget how much you've had to drink, and sometimes
100%. Me on
a really.
Friday. Yeah. Yeah.
And so just having the awareness of like, oh, I actually had four
Mm-hmm.
vodka sodas that night. Well,
Mm-hmm.
guess what? Usually vodka soda has like two shots. So you
Mm-hmm.
just had eight shots, eight
It's so
drinks.
easy to just do.
So easy.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This has been amazing. Any like final thoughts?
Final thoughts. Let's do more of these. I'm totally
More.
happy to speak with also anybody who's got like questions.
Mm-hmm.
DM me on Instagram. It's Maggie Lives. If you just want to throw out some things that you want to
Mm-hmm.
chat about with me,
Mm-hmm.
or if you're like, what do you think about this? I'm totally open to
Mm-hmm.
that idea. Just being able to educate the general population, like that was really was my only goal for joining P2.
Yeah, right. 100%. And you're doing such a good job with it. I'm obsessed.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very just excited to share anything that I
Mm-hmm.
know. Psychoeducation really is my favorite. And
Yeah.
by the way, I get to see you live for the
Oh
first
my God, I
time.
get to see you. We haven't even talked about this.
Yeah,
Oh
I've
my God.
known Penny for almost 3 years now, and I finally get to meet
Oh
her
my
and
God.
hopefully Tyler Yee.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, how insane. That's so funny. We haven't even talked about this because, like, what is life? I'm like operating on an hour to hour basis right now. But yeah, so for people who don't know, who didn't listen to the first podcast, Maggie, I met her because she was my client years ago at this point, but 4 years she was. And she's quoted on the back of my book. She's just been a friend since being a client. And I've always known of her profession because, again, she's been in psychology and social work for 10 years. And so she is who I thought of for this position. And anyways, we've never met. I mean, I even got her on stage. Like, we did competition, like we've been through it and have never seen each other in person. So finally she's in Cincinnati for work and I'm in Akron and we're going to meet in Columbus. And honestly, I don't like Bryce and Ye are great, but like, let's be honest. I'm going to be like, Maggie, I'm going to be crying.
This meetup is going to be like, I think I'm just going to be screaming.
I know. I might be crying actually.
Can't wait.
Bryce will be like, yeah, cool. No, it'll be amazing. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I love you. Let's definitely do more of these. To everyone else, thank you for listening. Like Maggie said, please reach out to her. Full disclosure, consults with Maggie are not P2 restricted. You can book with her. I mean, she basically, we want to give her a platform to literally work with anyone. You do not have to be an active client with us because she's, again, listen to the first podcast because she's a stepping stone. If you're not sure about where your headspace is, if you've never done therapy, if you don't know if you need it, she's the stepping stone. She's not replacing therapy. She can help you along the way. So when she says, ask me questions, that's literally what she's for. So if you think, if this resonates with you, if you want to do more of this discussion, this is like literally what she does. So reach out to her. I'm also taking clients. So if you want to work with me, DM me. Thanks, everyone.